Imagine you were in a foreign, noisy, and crowded city at night, not understanding the language spoken, recognizing only a few words, but not really comprehending the situations that were taking place around you, wanting to express a need for help, but not being able to. This experience may begin to help you relate to what a child with autism feels on an ordinary day. The author is unknown for this quote. If you would like to look it up yourself, it can be found on Facebook under the subgroup Single Mothers Who Have Children with Autism. My name is Cassandra Shulkoff, and for my cultural artifact presentation today, I want to talk to you about autism, specifically how autism can be a culture and how parents of children who are on the spectrum and who have autism, they are also immersed and a part of that culture, specifically relating to how they are like their child's tour guide. They're navigating the world for them, navigating their interactions. So to begin, I think I need to explain what autism is. Autism is a neurological and developmental disorder. It affects how people interact with others, how they socialize, how they communicate, how they learn, and how they behave. Essentially, the brain is wired differently. If you think about the different neurapses and synapses in the brain, if you look at the autistic brain, if you're looking at it under a microscope, you will see that it is wired differently than someone who is neurotypical and who has normal brain functioning. Autism spectrum disorders. So when you think of autism, you think of a spectrum. I like to think of it as sound waves, long sound waves, a continuum of sound waves with highs and lows that keep going and going and going. At its farthest end, one way, you might see significant impairment, people who need a lot of help with their daily life or who may have a lot of trouble communicating. At its farthest point the other way, you may see someone who's considered high functioning, where you might just see a few quirks or different things that might seem unusual to you, but something still is different within their brain. It's wired differently. A lot of times I hear people say, especially about my son, well, he doesn't look like he's autistic. I don't see anything wrong with him. And it's not that there's necessarily anything wrong. It's just that things are connected differently inside the brain. One thing to think about is that no two people who have autism are the same. If you've met one person with autism, you've literally met one person with autism. That's what's nice about thinking of it as a continuum, the highs and the lows, like sound waves falling, where people fall on this spectrum. They might be really good, exemplary experts in a certain area, and in other areas, they might have a lot of trouble and need more help. The most important aspect to think about autism and to recognize regarding communication is that somebody who's on the spectrum, an adult or a child, they lack that social script that we in society are accustomed to, that we recognize. And this affects how they communicate. And they may lack language altogether, in the sense of being nonverbal, where their communication isn't coming through with words. They may use what we call echoics or echolalia, where they're repeating things that they've heard said previously to them or in the moment. An example of this would be, what do you want for dinner? And instead of answering and saying, I want pizza, they might say, what do you want for dinner? What do you want for dinner? And just keep repeating it over and over again. They may come up to you and start scripting, telling you word for word something that they've heard on a TV show or in passing conversation they heard somebody else say. It may not be relevant to the receiver in the communication process, but it's meaningful to the person who is autistic in some way. So we know from this quarter that culture is learned patterns of perception, values, and beliefs, behaviors. It's shared by a group of people. And to be a part of the culture, you have to communicate with people of that group. Well, when you're thinking about autism, how can you communicate if you don't have language, or if you lack that social script that society deems as acceptable? Well, the good news is, just like Professor Owen told us, that as long as one person is aware of your existence, you're communicating. You cannot not communicate. And there are many different ways to communicate. An example of this, when my son was a little older than 3 years old, we got him together to play and visit with a distant cousin who was also on the spectrum, and they had never met before. And they were more interested in playing alongside each other on opposite sides of the rooms, not really interacting. And then 5 minutes into the play date, into the visit, my son walked over and placed his forehead against the forehead of his cousin, whom he had never met. And they let their foreheads rest like that for several minutes, just foreheads touching, communicating to each other. They were communicating, even though myself, my husband, everybody else who was in the room, we didn't know what they were saying, the information they were passing back and forth, but they were communicating. So people on the spectrum communicate in different ways, but different doesn't mean less. Like everybody, they communicate. Now let's look at patterns of behavior, shared perception. One thing to note is that there is a lot of rigidity within the scope of a person with autism's routine, their daily interactions. And this is because they thrive off of sameness and routine. They don't like change. While autism culture covers the definition of learned patterns of perceptions and values, behaviors, attitudes, because through repetition and routine, a person with autism learns how to function and to be a member of society and to be involved in different cultures and to interact with different cultures. They practice. And myself as a parent, I fit into this autism culture because I act as the facilitator for my son's interactions. I navigate. I'm the tour guide. I'm constantly inserting my child into a world that doesn't understand him. I contact providers. I schedule his day, advocate for him. We go out into the community. We practice daily activities that a typically functioning person might take for granted, like waiting in line, taking a turn, opening the door for a stranger, responding to someone when they say hello. So I facilitate his communication with others and his interactions, hoping that he picks up on these and he learns these behaviors. Sometimes I give him prompts that may be verbal or physical, depending on what's necessary. An example of this and something that's highly cultural is people who are on the spectrum, they find it physically painful to maintain and hold eye contact. Well, eye contact in American culture is expected. It's demanded. And so something that I do is when I am prompting my son for eye contact, I point to my nose. Pointing to the nose prompts him that he needs to look, but the nose is less intimidating than the eyes. It works as a modification for him. He's able to adapt that way. It takes the stress off the situation of having to gaze into somebody else's eyes just by giving him this modification so that he can function and be a part of the group. Another part that makes this a culture is that parents of children who are on the spectrum seek out other parents who also have children with special needs and diverse abilities. We communicate with each other. We look for advice from each other. We look for hope in the stories of other people's success, of their children's success. It's kind of like creating a community or a tribe, a distant family of others. And they are a part of the autism culture as well. So autism culture, there's communication. Might not be specific communication that everybody else is used to doing, but there is communication. And even though it's not typical, it does have shared patterns, behaviors, values that we're picking up on, that we're teaching, that we're practicing, and that as parents we are facilitating, like a tour guide. Autism is also present in many different cultures in the world. It's not just the diagnosis that comes through in the United States. An example of this, and something that I think that is really beautiful, is that the Maori tribe in New Zealand, which is an indigenous tribe, they have a specific word for autism that was added into the language in 2017. And it is Takiwatanga. Takiwatanga. And it means in his or her own space and time. And so this beautiful outlook that they have on autism, they don't feel autism as a disability, but rather as a deeper connection with the rhythms of nature and the world, working in the man or woman, the boy or girl's own time and their own space, compared to neurotypical people who are regularly functioning. So to touch on history, autism didn't really become recognized until the beginning of the 20th century. In 1908, a Swiss psychiatrist with the last name of Bueller used the term autism to label and discuss some traits that he saw with people who had schizophrenia, who tended to withdraw from social interaction. Autism comes from the word autos, which actually means self. In 1943, American psychologist Leo Kanner, he published a paper about a group of kids who had specific traits and characteristics like lack of interest in social interactions and preoccupation with objects like cars and trains and coins. And he called this early infantile autism, and his paper was considered the foundation for modern autism research. In the 60s and 70s, the research continued to focus more on causes of autism. They proposed a number of theories, including poor parenting and a lack of emotional attention from a mother. They called it cold parenting. In the 70s, they also started to look at more of a genetic component to autism. In the 80s and 90s, they changed the diagnostic criteria and the disorder started to be more recognized. That's also when they started to look to other things, though, and they blamed autism on the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine because of the metals in it. But that was not the case. That has actually been debunked. Moving forward into 2007, the CDC estimated that 1 in 150 children in the U.S. had autism. And that's actually risen to, in recent years, 1 in 54, and now is said to be 1 in 36 children and 1 out of 45 adults. So my artifact I want to talk about is going to be the clothing that I have on. I have a t-shirt, I have one of my sweatshirts on, and in the beginning, I wore these in public more out of fear, due to fear, and hoping for understanding for my child. I thought that if I wore this, that they would see it and be like, okay, we can give some more understanding to the behaviors that they were seeing. And now I wear them out of pride and hope. Often the puzzle pieces on this will spark conversation with another person. And they'll relate their stories, or I'll see another parent and they'll be like, oh, I also have a child on the spectrum. Puzzle pieces that you see on here, the puzzle piece is like the most widely known symbol for autism awareness and acceptance. It was brought about in the 1960s. It was chosen to represent the complexity and mystery of autism, and the idea that something is missing. It emphasizes the need for understanding and the support for people with autism. Now, a lot of people have trouble with the puzzle piece. They think that it symbolizes that autistic people are incomplete. And others have criticized it because it can symbolize focusing on a way to fix people with autism. So they like the infinity symbol better, which is typically rainbow colored, and it represents neurodiversity and the infinite possible variations within the autism spectrum. Some language that you might hear, and I know some of it I've already said in this, is echolalia, so repetition of words, sounds, scripting. Usually this repeating is done in a self-soothing way. Stim or stimming. You might see someone on the spectrum flapping their hands, twirling, spinning, tapping their foot, shaking their knee. I know a lot of people that do that who are not on the spectrum. High functioning and low functioning are labels that are sometimes attached to people who are on the spectrum. Masking refers to the behaviors autistic people both repress and adopt so that they can be a part of society and adapt to that. A meltdown, you might see an autistic meltdown. It's an intense involuntary reaction to overwhelming sensory, emotional, or cognitive stimulus. It could be caused from sensory overload, emotional stress, fatigue, hunger. Typically, the autistic brain is taking in so much information at once that they can't filter it all out. For instance, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you. I can filter out the humming of the lights in my house, the background noise, the cars driving by outside. My brain filters that out. Temperature, it also can filter that out, where I only focus on one thing at a time. My son's brain cannot do that. He's constantly processing so much information at once. So what do I hope or desire that you would take from this presentation? I hope that for empathy and for understanding, for people to be open-minded when they're interacting with people in the community, and when they see parents coming out into the community, bringing their children out into society, trying to integrate them, getting them involved in different cultures, and a willingness to create an inclusive space for them. What do you need to know to communicate with a person on the spectrum? Well, it's important to remain open-minded and not easily offended by the blunt things that they may say. They definitely, if they are verbal, they speak their truth. They think concretely. Not to be upset if they don't acknowledge you. And to give appropriate wait time if you're asking them questions and talking to them, because there's so much information going through their brains at once that it may take more time for them to acknowledge you. Some stereotypes that I would like to demystify are that there is not a cure for autism. Some 50, 60 years ago, they were still institutionalizing people who were on the spectrum. They were even doing shock therapy. Now we have more humane types of therapy to help integrate into society. But there's no cure. It's not something that needs to be fixed. People who are on the spectrum are usually highly intelligent in some way or another. They usually have like preoccupations and specific things that they like to focus on. I've learned a lot from my son and from other people who I've come in contact with. To be nonverbal, this is another stereotype. If you're nonverbal, that doesn't mean you don't understand what people are saying to you. And so you really need to be careful what you're saying in front of people. You can really cause some psychological harm if you're saying things just because you think that a person can't understand you if they're nonverbal. And the last thing, you cannot spank the autism out of a child. I think this comes from some maybe ignorance to learning, resistance to change, but it's not something that you can do. You just have to work through it. To offer a sense of completeness, I would just like to say, I really believe autism is a culture. It's a group of people with neurodiverse abilities who want and need to be a part of society. And parents of children on the spectrum, they're in constant search of ways to insert their child into society and have them be included, seen, involved, and accepted. And, we're constantly practicing, trying to teach them the customs of these different cultures. And we just need acceptance. I'm going to leave you with a quote today. I know I'm over my time, and I'm so sorry for that. I feel like I have so much information to share. But this is by Rosie Tennant Doran, and it goes like this. Autism is like a rainbow. It has a bright side. It has a darker side. But every shade is important and beautiful. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them. And I hope that you found this enlightening. Thank you.